Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 422. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another fantastic guest. Today, we are talking about adventures in goal setting. You may remember our guest, Brad Borkan, from episode 370, when we talked about how outdoors adventures can help you make better decisions in life. And last time on the show, we discussed Brad's book, When Your Life Depends on It, which is about Antarctic explorers. This time, we're discussing his latest book, Audacious Goals, Remarkable Results. I recently read the book and I was fascinated by the stories of three men who set massive goals and achieved them. And in doing so, left a legacy that went far beyond their own lifetimes into our modern world. Now, so often when we're reading stories of historical figures who have achieved great things, it feels so removed from our own modern lives. But Brad's book does a great job of pulling real-life lessons that we can take away from these stories. And in this episode, he shares some of them with us. So, who is Brad? Brad Borkan has a lifelong interest in how people survive and thrive in almost impossible situations. Brad is co-author of 2 books, When Your Life Depends on It, and Audacious Goals, Remarkable Results. Brad is an author and lecturer and has presented at business and Antarctic conferences, appeared on cable TV in the US, as a guest on podcasts and internet radio programs, as well as keynote speaker at a literary festival. Brad has traveled to all 7 continents. And in 2019, he gave a guest lecture about his first book on a 114-passenger expedition cruise to Antarctica. Originally from the US and now based in London, Brad was honored to be made a Fellow of the Royal Geographic Society. His website is extreme-decisions.com. You can also find him on Facebook and Twitter. So, what are you going to learn in this episode? We share some stories of people who have set massively audacious goals in their lives. We discuss stories of people achieving huge goals despite setbacks. We talk about how to envision even bigger goals for yourself, and Brad has some great tips on this. We discuss how to broaden the vision that you have for your life. And finally, we talk about setting your own audacious goals. So I hope that you enjoy this episode and find it really useful in setting your own goals for your personal life, your career, your adventures, and more. Hello, Brad. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me on your show, Holly.
I am super excited to talk to you about your latest book. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into talking about the book.
Okay, great. I'm a displaced American like yourself. so I'm originally from New Jersey and I live in London and I've lived here for almost 30 years now.
Wow.
So I've had my whole career basically working in high tech in the UK. And just recently, actually on July 30th, so just a few weeks ago, retired from my job to become a full-time author.
Yay!
Yeah, I know. It's taken a lot of decision-making to go through and decide this is the right course of action to pursue my passion. And that coincided with the launch of my new book. And so
Perfect.
I had a very stressful July trying to time the ending of the editing and everything for the book launch to go with being able to wrap everything up so I could leave the team with all the carry through that they need to do from my work there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's huge. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting. And I'm excited to talk about the book as well, because I think there's so much to learn from it for your audience and for everyone around the world to understand what people did and how they achieved great things.
Absolutely. So tell us about your book.
Sure. How long have you got? So the book is titled Audacious Goals, Remarkable Results. And we agonized for over a year about the
Wow.
title. And the subtitle is How an Explorer, an Engineer, and a Statesman Shaped Our Modern World.
Mm.
And it's a true book. It's historically accurate, but it's designed to be easy to read.
It is.
And it just tells the most remarkable stories. And probably the easiest way to describe it is if I tell you how we came about with the idea. So what happened was my co-author and I had written a book called When Your Life Depends on It. And it's about the life and death decisions that the early explorers made on the ice in Antarctica. And this was in the early 1900s. And we had this fascination around Antarctica and these great figures of Captain Scott and Shackleton and Amundsen and these various explorers. And that book did quite well and generated a lot of interest. And we thought, how do we follow that up? What do we do next? And we thought, well, let's write about things that interest us. And we started thinking, well, let's come up with like 11 things, big things that happened around the world. And in this sort of time frame, 1800s, 1900s, and things that influenced how we live our lives today. And so that's everything from we had probably had a list of 50 things, like everything from the invention of the phonograph to the invention of the airplane to get to the top of Mount Everest, to the first heart transplant, to the first telegraph, all sorts of different things, not always first things, but things that were instrumental to the world. And things like the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the getting into outer space, invention of cars, invention of all sorts of different things. And we started looking at that thinking, well, how do we narrow this down? This is just way too much to write about. And we're trying to get down to 11. We thought, okay, let's stay with the geophysical world and focus on things that were like, okay, the history of how the Wright brothers built an airplane has been written about a lot. But what's about the early aviation? Or cars have been written about a lot, but what about all-terrain vehicles? And thinking about transport and thinking about how people moved around the Earth, how people got to the North Pole, the South Pole, through the Northwest Passage, which was the desired sea route across northern Canada to connect Europe to Asia. And we had all these things that we were like, okay, so we need to narrow this down further. But as we were doing that, we're making all these spreadsheets with dates. I know it's like, hey, I worked in IT.
I love spreadsheets. So the word spreadsheet just sparks like joy for me.
Oh, that's great. I feel embarrassed saying I'm an author and I work from spreadsheets. So you're looking at dates and times and decisions and people. And all of a sudden, what occurred to us when we chose these 11 things that all dealt with the geophysical world that we live in, and 3 names kept popping up. And we thought, okay, yes, there'll be remarkable people who did each of these different things, like the Wright brothers or Henry Ford with automobiles or some things like that. But you had 3 people's names, and they were Theodore Roosevelt, who's well known to everyone around the world, probably, at least as a U.S. president. You had Roald Amundsen, who's an explorer who is famous for getting to the South Pole, but I can tell you a little bit more about him. But he's very well known in Norway. And if you're in Antarctic polar circles, you would know his name. But beyond that, he's probably not that well known around the world. And then you had Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who was half French, half British, and an engineer who worked in Victorian times. And again, someone who's just not well known at all outside of Britain, and yet he's a household name in Britain.
Yeah.
And I think, but these people's names just kept coming back. Like it wasn't just one project they worked on; it was 2 and sometimes 3. And you're like, when we jot down to our 11 things that really define the world, and come out of like there are 3 people who did this, it just immediately raised the question of who are they and what did they do that was different than what everybody else, all their contemporaries, were doing.
Yeah.
And that was the start of the book. So the book is focused on these 3 men, and we chose 2 of each of their big endeavors. So 6 big endeavors. And that's the book. It's six epic achievements and these 3 incredible people. And it's the story of all that. And then looking at it from the point of view of what can we learn from all this?
Yeah.
Because history is fun and history is nice. But if you're just going to write a book about they did this on that date and then they walked another 5 miles on this date and then they did this on the... It's like to me, that's not as interesting as the decision making that was going on and the takeaways. Like as a modern person, I want to know, what do I get from all this?
Yeah.
What can I learn from people like Roosevelt and Amundsen and Brunel? to bring into my modern life.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think there's so many things we can learn from these stories. So what makes these projects so remarkable?
It's that one thing we're looking for when we start defining what do we want to be able to write about. It is about we can go see them today. Now, they may not be easy to get to. You can't easily get to the South Pole, but you can get to the South Pole. You can get through the Northwest Passage. You can see national parks. So it'd probably be good to explain what the 6 projects are.
Yes.
But you'll get a sense that you can see all these things. So starting with Brunel, who was the engineer. So we're taking it chronologically.
Mm-hmm.
Brunel lived in the early to mid 1800s. And so the first thing that we write about is the Thames Tunnel, which is, you think, well, it's just a tunnel. It actually is the first tunnel under a flowing river that was ever built. And when you think about building tunnels, building in solid rock, you've got blasted away the rock, but the rock basically stays intact.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way they built mines. But building under a river is completely different for reasons you can appreciate.
Yeah.
It's sand, silt, all this stuff. And as you know from living in London, the Thames is tidal.
Yeah.
So it's flowing, it's ebbing and flowing with the tide. So you've got this uneven weight on top of your tunnel structure that you're building. And then the next thing that Brunel got involved in was the building of the Great Western Railway.
Mm-hmm.
And the Great Western Railway is the journey from London to Bristol.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't the first railway. He didn't invent the locomotive. He didn't invent the railway. But when we take a modern trip on a train today, anywhere in the world, it is influenced by what Brunel did when he was building the Great Western Railway. So we can talk about that because that's great fun and it's British history. And again, it's something you can go see. You can take the London and Bristol line today and see the stations that he built and get a sense of the journey. And it's just a remarkable thing. And then moving on to the books written, we start with Brunel and then we go to Theodore Roosevelt. He didn't design the first national park or just declare this is the first national park, but he was the one to say, let's use legislation to protect land and wildlife in a big way. And again, there are many, many national parks, not just in America. And yes, his focus was America. But since then, there are national parks in 120 countries around the world. And it's just, when you go to a national park today, whether it's in Britain or whether it's in France or whether it's in Australia or anywhere, those all stem from the work that Roosevelt did. His influence in how you use legislation to protect things is influenced that. And the other thing he did was the Panama Canal.
Yeah. Which I think we take for granted. Like, it's just existed as long as we've all been alive, and we don't think about the massive undertaking that was.
It was an absolutely massive undertaking, and it had been from the time when Balboa landed in Panama, which was the 1500s, and he determined that Panama's like 40 miles wide. And I get to the other side of it, and there's a big ocean there, and realizing from that moment on, everyone started looking for how do you connect the waterways in Panama? How can you build a waterway that would connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean? Because the alternative and what was happening to enable trade between Europe and Asia was either you sail around the bottom of Africa or you sail around the bottom of South America. But if you had a canal to go across Panama, that would be monumental. It had been sought for 400 or 500 years and the French tried in the late 1800s and failed miserably. Just a fascinating story of why they failed. And then the Americans came in and then another 10-year, 12-year, 14-year project to do that. And then moving on to Amundsen, who, again, another 500-year quest was connecting Europe to Asia. This was for trading for spices, for all sorts of different reasons. There was trade going on between these continents. But they thought, well, again, before the Panama Canal was even built or even envisioned, people were talking about how do we get across northern Canada? There must be a sea route. But across northern Canada, up in the Arctic region, there are lots and lots of islands, some big, some small, all sort of ice-encrusted, snow-encrusted areas. So you can't necessarily sail through, even if there's water there. And you can say, yes, this is not land, this is water. For the most part, it's ice covered. So you can't go through it. So the quest to find the Northwest Passage was another big quest. And Amundsen discovered that. And after, again, 400 or 500 year quest, well, probably 300 or 400 year quest for that. But he was also the first to get to the South Pole. And he had desires to get to the North Pole. But I'll leave it to anyone who's going to read the book, what happened with the North Pole with him. I don't want to spoil the whole book when I talk about it, but there's so many wonderful little stories in amongst all of this. And like I said, you can see all this.
Yeah.
And I think because you run and you do a lot of outdoors activities, and probably a lot of your listeners do, all the things we write about are outdoor activities.
Yeah.
I mean, building the railway Brunel surveyed the land on horseback for 10 weeks. And you're more familiar with the British countryside than I am from your walks. And it's quite varied.
Yes. Yes.
But the stories are very much outdoor stories. They're under the tunnels inside in a sense, but you're fundamentally outside.
Yeah, you're underground.
Underground, but you're not in an office.
Yeah.
National parks, you're not in an office. Panama Canal, you're not in an office. And that's, I think, what makes the book exciting. The stories are exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about how to work with nature to create these things.
That's exactly it. And we talk in the book about this concept. They were movers, and we use the word shapers rather than the concept movers and shakers. But you think of movers, they were transforming the world, but trying to make it better. And it wasn't easy. And yes, people lost their lives.
Yeah.
And we're not shy about saying that. Building the tunnel to the Great Western Railway goes through a tunnel, and that's 2 miles long. And people lost their lives in the construction of that tunnel. Many, many thousands of people lost their lives in the construction of the Panama Canal. And we're not shy about talking about that and the challenges. I mean, these are the challenges of these things, but at the same time, these are the big monumental undertakings.
I think the interesting thing about this is that they engaged in these massive projects that had such an unanticipated knock-on effect. I mean, it was like Brunel was focused on building, a tunnel under the Thames. He created technology that made that possible for so many other tunnels around the world. And now we think nothing of passing underneath a waterway because he made that possible. Like, that was just huge.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, and the same goes for the other stories in the book. I mean, every project in this book had such a knock-on effect around the world and made other things possible. It's just, I'm assuming they probably, or maybe they were thinking about that when they did it, or maybe they weren't, maybe they were just focused on the project, but the things that they did made so many other things possible.
Yes, I think, just to clarify on the tunnel, Mark Brunel, who is Isambard Kingdom Brunel's father, was the one who designed the tunneling technology.
Yes.
So he was a famous engineer to start with.
Yeah.
But Isambard was the one who was in the tunnel day after day, directing the men in the digging of it. He had designed this thing called a tunneling shield, exactly the way every tunnel that is bored that goes underwater, or almost every tunnel that is bored just in general nowadays, uses this tunneling shield technology that was built and designed in the 1820s.
That's so hard. It's so hard for me to even comprehend.
When you think about going into New York City, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel,
San Francisco, the Transbay Tunnel.
Yeah. Exactly. All these tunnels are all using the same fundamental technology. Yes, they're not dug with pickaxes and shovels. And that's I think, what makes the book interesting, because you can go to the tunnel. There's a Brunel Museum at the tunnel. You can't walk through it because the tunnel's right now being used by the London Underground. And their trains go through it. And it's been used by the London Underground for the last 150-something years. And the thing that's remarkable, and this is really, I think, what makes the story so remarkable, is when you realize things like it's the longest tunnel in the London Underground network that goes under the Thames.
Oh, wow.
And it's the least repaired. It's still as close to original as it was when they built it. And it's the most watertight. All the tunnels leak a little bit, drip a little bit. But this, it's like this is sort of unbelievable things that came out of these people's. And they looked at these things. I mean, talking about the tunnel on the Great Western Railway, it's 2 miles long. So when you get between Bath and Chippenham, there's an area called Box, a village called Box. And through Box Hill, they're building this. It's like, to make a train go fast, basically, you have to have the train go as level as possible. Trains can't go up and down hills like cars can. So you've got choices. Either you level out a hill, or you go around the hill, or you go through the hill.
Yeah.
And so this was 2 miles long. No one's ever built a tunnel of this length. I mean, no one had built a tunnel a mile long in a mine up to this point. And Brunel looks at it and goes, yeah, we got to build a tunnel 2 miles long. And so it's going to take us 5 years. We'll just do it. And they just looked at these things. Same with Panama Canal. They just looked at these things, just started going and set these audacious goals and just started plowing forward.
Yeah. It's very remarkable to me how they had such a big vision for themselves and what they thought they were capable of doing.
Right. You touched on this in your previous question, which was, yes, they were focused on the end point,
Mm-hmm.
as in we're going to build a railway, we're going to build a tunnel, but I think they were focused on what's the benefit for society of doing this,
Yeah.
because it's not just a tunnel and it's not just a railway. It is a complete means of transportation that can be copied and mimicked around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Tunneling technology, the national parks. Well, you're not going to build another Panama Canal, but it's like, but there was the focus of the Panama Canal on being, yes, you've got to focus on getting the thing finished, but the focus of getting you through all the hardships is the benefits to for society when it's done, which is global trade.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can argue nowadays we look back on things and say, well, global trade may not be great. You could argue against global trade, but in the early 1900s, the biggest impediment to trade, even like getting things that were built on the West Coast to the East Coast of America or vice versa, you'd have to go down through the bottom of South America. And traveling, not only is that a long journey, months of journeying on sea, it's very risky because the waters across the bottom of South America are dangerous. And for the longest time, before there was really good radar and sonar and all the different things that ships have nowadays, it was treacherous, and it's very stormy and there are a lot of rocks. And so it's like, so ships are getting shipwrecked. And so you were saving lives by saying, if you could build something like that.
Yeah. So what makes these people so remarkable? How were they able to have such a big vision and achieve their goals?
I think they understood that things took time. And I think that one level was all around patience, that knowing that Panama Canal is going to take longer to build than even if Roosevelt wins a second term in office, it's going to be longer than those 2 terms in office as president.
Yeah.
Nowadays, people are looking for the quick wins, right? And he's, and you see this in business all the time. Like, what are we going to achieve this in this quarter or next quarter? It's like, if it's not, why do it? And here they're like, okay, so what if it takes us 10 years, 12 years to do this? I think it took about 11 years, I think, in total for the Panama Canal from the start of the American dig. When they were already using some of the dig that the French started. So it's these things are take a long time. And I think it's that patience. It's about, I know with your ultra marathon running and things like that, you're persevering through adversity. Yeah. You must have times when you're like, why am I doing this? I'm just in awe that you do this. Seriously, I'm just seriously in awe of anyone who can push themselves past into the situations of duress. And I think Brunel working in the tunnel day after day. I mean, the Thames was the sewer of London for 1,000 years.
Yeah, it was
and they're digging the tunnel, and it's fully toxic, and it's filled with fumes, and workers are dying, going blind, getting crippled from the toxic water that's seeping into the tunnel. And why would you put up with this? And I think it's the same thing with ultra marathon running. It's like the short-term pain is worth the effort.
Yeah.
And the same with the railway. The railway took, I can't remember the exact duration of how long it took to build it, 5, 6, 7 years. There's a lot of challenge, political challenges. You've got engineering challenges. You've got all sorts of different challenges around building railways. And of course, there's lots of failures along the way. I mean, the first locomotives they put on the railway didn't work very well. The first journey was terrible. It's like not everything that could go wrong went wrong, but in the sense that some of the great innovations that Brunel first had, like how they're going to lay the tracks, which would be different than the way tracks were laid in the past, were like, they weren't good. They were failures. And persevering through that, being, okay, yeah, so it didn't really work. But now I'll just regroup and rethink and go through it. And it's that perseverance. So it's sort of the passion, perseverance combination.
And I think, as you said earlier, kind of knowing your why and going back to that why, like their goals weren't just about them. They were about how to help humanity, how to help society, how to help other people. So I think when you have that big reason for why you're doing this big thing, I think it makes it easier to kind of go back to that and like always have that in your mind. And I think that's one of the things that can help you to stick to your difficult thing and persevere. And resilience, it really builds resilience as well.
Yes. And I think it's this ability to focus on not just the end goal, but the benefit, and to see it as short-term discomfort is to be accepted.
Yeah.
And all the little annoyances that come along are part of the fun
Yeah.
of it. And I think they saw that as, well, whether it's the legislation to protect national parks. And he didn't start out and say, yes, we're going to build all these different. He actually only built 6 national parks, just to set the record straight. But he did build the entire National Forest Service. And Roosevelt ultimately protected 234 million acres of land, which in context, certainly for an American audience, would understand that it's more land than the original 13 states occupy today. So states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island. I mean, I know Rhode Island's small, but Rhode Island, all these 13 originals, that's how much land he protected during his presidency. It's just mind-boggling. And this is the ability to get things done. Keep a focus on the end result, but keep a focus on benefits, keep a focus on, it's not the tally of the 234 million acres that he was tallying. It was the fun of doing it. It was the fun of going like, now we can protect this herd of bison. Now we can protect these pelicans in Florida. And it's that, the excitement that's drawn from that.
And that land, so where did he get the land to create the national parks? I mean, was it up? I hate to say this, but I feel like I have to touch on this. Was it occupied by native peoples, or was it privately owned, or how did he make that happen?
Well, yes, it's important to touch on this because it certainly was part of it was Indian-based land. And that's one of the horrors of the thing. And we talk about this in the book because we are, at times you look at Roosevelt, who's probably the most controversial. All of these people were sort of complex, flawed individuals. And you can look at Roosevelt as a hero and you can look at Roosevelt as a villain. But the reality was somewhat more mixed than that because what Roosevelt was doing, and it's very interesting because he's a Republican. So very different from the Republicans that you see in politics in the last so many years, because he's anti-big business and he's anti-development and he's fighting, because the problem was not saying, okay, we're going to take this land and take it from the Indians and protect it. It was to prevent all the developers. The developers wanted to go in and mine for oil and mine for gold and mine for whatever minerals they thought might be there and ravage the land, take away all the trees. They were doing all this. And if he hadn't stepped in and started preserving the land, we wouldn't have the Grand Canyon today, the way it looks today. We wouldn't have Yellowstone. We wouldn't have a lot of these different national parks. Well, Yellowstone had already been protected, but Grand Canyon certainly, and all the national parks that came ever since then were preserved land.
Yeah.
I think one of the tragedies as well is that Mount Rushmore is built on Indian land. Yeah. But no one ever asked. It was built after Roosevelt died. So no one ever asked him, said, hey, I believe that as he became more enlightened, he probably would have been against that. Yeah. But he certainly has a heritage that is worth reading about. And
I think that's the important thing, is that no one's 100% good or 100% bad. We're all nuanced.
Yes, it's hard to look at these people in modern light. Yeah. And at the same time, it needs to be done. Yeah. And I mean, he was an avid hunter, and his hunting tallies were just anti-hunting. I'm not sure how my co-author feels, but I was very much horrified. I think David was as well. Very much horrified by the tallies of his just shooting animals. Yeah. Even though he sort of advocated fair chase hunting. Yeah. The reality was still hunting. Yeah. And he wasn't eating these animals. So it wasn't like he would kill one thing and then have it for dinner. It was game hunting. It was, wasn't it? It was mixed. It was some of us are scientific, supposedly for scientific purposes, for the American Museum of Natural History in New York, for different, but the reality was, is still horrific. Yeah. Yeah. And, and I think this is the, but that's what makes the book interesting, I think, because it gives you something to think about. Yeah, it does. And to realize as well that we look at the world and go like, oh yeah, now we've got like all these developers who are trying to like destroy the environment. And it's like, hey, there were a lot of developers that are trying to destroy the environment in the early 1900s as well. Yeah. And if it wasn't for Roosevelt, America wouldn't look the way it does. And we wouldn't have national parks around the world the way we do. Yeah. So they're all fascinating. They're fascinating, flawed individuals, not always the best decision makers, not always the kindest person. Yeah. And Roosevelt, actually, there's a wonderful story that you'll enjoy about Roosevelt, which is, I don't even think, it may not even be in the book, which is he loved he grew up as a sickly boy. I mean, he had asthma. He nearly died a couple of times from his asthma attacks, and he was just determined as he became a teenager and less prone to asthma attacks. As a small, sickly child, to grow into this really tough guy, and probably one of the toughest human beings around of his era, and became this cowboy and just did these remarkable things that were very physical. And he took up boxing, and he did all these but he had this game, and he would do this when he was in the White House as well. It's like he and his children, or some of people who would be with him, they were like, what we're going to do is we're going to go from this point to that point, maybe go out to the woods somewhere, and be like, and what we're going to go in a straight line. We're going to climb over, swim through, whatever it is that we're going to do to get to our destination, and in a single straight line. If there's a building in the middle of it, a little hut or something, we're going to climb from over the top of it. It's just like sort of crazy stuff. And people would, he'd be like, oh, we're going to have a meeting with some other politicians. Oh, okay, wait, come with me. We're going to go for a walk. But it wouldn't really be a walk. It'd be like this sort of adventure outing where he'd be on a horse. It's like crazy stuff, but it was good fun to read about.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories from this. I mean, the amount of stories that you tell in your book, I think I found it really, really fascinating to see not just the projects, but like who these people are and the good and the bad.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful stories. It's the and the intersection of stories as well, because we were constantly surprised. And when we approach it, because David and I really come at it from the point of view of feeling like certainly David more than me, as being an Antarctic historian, and I've got great interest in decision making, and that what makes our partnership successful. But David's even then we were discovering things. What we didn't realize was that Amundsen had gone to the Antarctica in a ship called the Fram. Now, the Fram was already it is the most famous polar ship ever built. It was this Antarctic explorer, the early Arctic explorer, so Arctic being in the north, named Nansen, had the ship built with the idea across the North Pole, where in the South Pole you've got the continental land of Antarctica, and the North Pole you don't have any land. But no one really fully knew that. Yeah. No one was quite clear whether there was land or there was not land. The idea was, assuming there isn't land, that there's just sort of sea and ice floating on the sea. And his idea was you build the Fram, and the Fram's going to designed to not be able to be crushed in the ice, because if it gets encrusted in the ice, it will just sort of lift up, given the shape of the hull. And then eventually that ice mass will drift across the North Pole, and that's how they get to the North Pole. And so the Fram had been used for that sort of purpose. And so when Amundsen went to go to on his voyage, it's a big long story about why he didn't end up going to the North Pole, but he ended up heading south with the Fram. So the Fram became famous from Nansen and from Amundsen using it to go to the South Pole. And now the Panama Canal is going to be opened, and they invited the Fram to be the first ship through. Now, with Amundsen and Admiral Perry was supposedly had gotten to the North Pole, but he actually never did get to the North Pole. But at the time they thought he had. So the idea was the big opening of the Panama Canal would be with the Fram, and we didn't know this. It's like complete shock to us. Now here we know quite a bit about polar history. Yeah. At the same time, not connecting the fact that what we're writing about when we started the book on Panama Canal, it's like, oh, actually, there's this nice connection. Now the Fram never went through the Panama Canal. There are a lot of reasons for that. The canal construction was running late, and a couple other reasons. But that connection between the projects was interesting and fun to write about. Yeah,
I was surprised when I got to that point in the book. I was like, whoa, there are overlaps here in the projects.
There are so many. I mean, it was like and we were finding them even towards the end of the writing. And that's what we started adding in a few paragraphs here, a few paragraphs there. And I mean, there's just so many fun stories of, I think that's what makes it fun, but makes it, there are also some very useful lessons about baking in failure, knowing that as you're going to do something, you know the railway is going to have problems. You know the tunnel's going to flood, and you have no idea how badly.
Yeah.
You know you're going to have resistance, and the Panama Canal was fascinating because the idea was you build a sea level canal. And a sea level canal, basically, you say, okay, the Atlantic Ocean is the same level as the Pacific Ocean in theory, and you just dig a trench, basically. That's the way the Suez Canal was built.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, we can just do that. And that was a failure of the French, was that they had this desire to build a sea level canal. Only the challenge in Panama not only is a swamp and a jungle and filled with yellow fever and malaria and all sorts of horrible diseases that was killing all the workers. But through Panama, you've got the Continental Divide Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And Continental Divide, though they're not very tall there, they're only 300 feet high. They're pretty solid. And also you've got this they're like made of clay and rocks and all this stuff. And it's very wet because it's very rainy in this tropical rainforest fundamentally. Mm-hmm. And it's just very, very hard to dig through. And they realized that to dig a sea level canal, because of the landslides on the sides of the thing, you've got to dig this enormous trench. And it keeps getting wider and wider and longer. And it's just an impossibility. And that's eventually they decided upon building locks. But it's just like the challenges were immense.
Hmm.
And
yeah, but I think that's really important what you said about how they went into it knowing that there would be challenges. Whereas I think so often, like when we're going for like the fast wins and the fast, achievements, it's like we hope, either we dream or hope or whatever that we aren't going to have challenges and that everything's going to be smooth sailing. And then when you get hit with a challenge, it's quite tough. So what are some of your top tips that you've learned from your research on these massive, audacious goals? Because one thing is to set a huge goal and another thing is to actually achieve it.
Right. I think one thing, and this was very interesting early on, was how do you set a big goal? And I think one thing is to whatever goal you set, mm-hmm. Triple it or quadruple it.
Ooh.
So if you want to write one book, think about, what if I was to try to write 4 books? Mm. What if I was to, if you were going to run a marathon, what if I was to run 4 marathons? How would I train differently for this endeavor if I was thinking I was going to be doing 4 of these things? Mm-hmm. Or you say, oh yeah, I want to go start my own business. Well, what if you're going to start 4 businesses? Mm-hmm. How would your mindset be different? Or rather than saying, nowadays you think about, okay, when I work for a company, how do I advance my career, to how do I get my boss's job? Yeah. I say, no. How do you get your boss's bosses? Like I work in a big company with 100,000 people. So you can imagine the hierarchical levels. How would my mindset be different to achieve something bigger? And I think that's what they were all 3 men were. And again, I think this applies to men and women. And our next book, we're thinking about doing another book that will be 3 people, but in that case, it'd be 2 women and 1 man.
Oh, good. Thank you. Because the whole time I was reading this book, I was like, oh my God, these stories are amazing, but I would love to learn about what women were doing.
Oh, yes. That's her. We're very starting to plan that. Good. This one, because it's geophysical.
Yeah, it was all male.
There's only been, up until Obama, there's only been white presidents, fundamentally white politicians. And people doing engineering work was fundamentally men, and people and explorers. But there was, we do have there are some wonderful stories. Admiral Perry, who tried to get to the North Pole, his second in command was Matthew Henson, who was Black.
Yeah. I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised to hear that.
Exactly. And he was totally accepted as a complete equal on explorer world level. And it's just and there's some interesting things. There's so actually Perry was quite advanced, though a bit of a scoundrel in his claim that he got to the North Pole when he didn't. Yeah. His first expedition involved he took his wife up to Greenland. Wow. So it's like in amongst with all the other men. And so there were women, but they were not the leaders in a sense. But so we're moving and saying, yes, we were very aware of that in writing the book, um, but felt, well, that's history, and there wasn't how to change. We couldn't change history. And so we were able to make up for it with two women and one man in the next book.
Good. So I really like what you said about taking your goals and like tripling them or quadrupling them, because I think that's a really great way to expand your vision. So in what other ways can people incorporate this approach or the other things that you've learned from Brunel and Roosevelt and Amundsen into their own projects and career?
I think it's fundamentally, it's doing what is your passion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, when I announced I was retiring from SAP, which is a corporation I was working for, quite a number of people reached out to me and said, gee, they want to do the same. They want to follow their passion. Now, I really loved working at SAP, and so I really enjoyed that. But if people aren't finding that fulfilling and they've got other desires, as you do, writing books and doing your podcast and doing things, that there's a lot to be said for that, to find that passion. And if you have that passion, you will most likely succeed, because every day won't be work. It'll be fun. So what if working 10, 12, 15 hours a day, you're following your passion. And that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing was, they never stopped achieving. We have a whole chapter called "They Never Stopped Achieving." They never stopped. They never said, "Oh, I've done the Northwest Passage and I'm now famous. I'm one of the most famous Norwegians who ever lived, and I've put my name in the record books, and now I'm going to put my feet up."
Yeah,
that wasn't Amundsen's way. Or I've got to the South Pole, I'm the first to the South Pole. Now I'm going to put my feet up. You could keep going, we talk about him. You talk about early aviation. He's the first one to fly an airplane over a polar region. He's the first one to take airplanes and start saying, how do we use these on expeditions? How do I take on my next expedition, put an airplane on the ship? It's like, these people they never stopped. And I think that's what makes it fun, is that you can't think about, you're saying, well, now I'm going to reach an age, whatever, and I'm going to retire, or I've got enough money in the bank, I'm going to retire. And it's like, these people, look at Bill Gates and Elon Musk and, all these. I mean, yes, you can say they're flawed individuals as well. But at the same time, they've got way more money than they could ever have to go sit on the beach for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and they're still doing stuff.
And they're still doing stuff. And I think that's part of the secret, is not to think about, I'm going to get to a wealth level or a success level and I'm going to just stop. It's like, it's like, keep going. If you can deliver, if you can give back to society, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And the same goes for personal goals. I mean, I think I did an episode a few weeks ago about post-adventure blues, because there is this thing about like post-trail depression. People will walk a long-distance trail and then they'll be depressed afterwards, or they'll have a big event, or they'll achieve a big goal, and then they get, a bit either full-blown depression or the blues afterwards, because it's like they've done this big thing and then it's over, and then what do you do? And I think that's why it's so important to have kind of a string of goals. And if you think bigger, and if you triple or quadruple your goals, each achievement is just a step on that path to that much, much bigger goal. So, I did my 100K last month, and the first thing I started thinking about when I finished it is, next goal is 100 miles. What 100-mile goals can I do, or what 100-mile races can I do next year? And I found the race that I wanted to do, and I haven't signed up for it yet because it hasn't opened up. But once it does, I've got that. So I think having those bigger next step goals is really, really helpful.
Yes, absolutely. I think it is helpful. Even if you don't achieve them, they're energizing.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think one of the things is, Roosevelt, again, for all his flaws, he was incredibly well-read and very well-spoken. And he would read a book a day, and even when he was president. And so he had these phrases like glorious triumphs, like dare mighty things. Like he had these wonderful speeches where he always was saying, it's about being in his case, he called it the man in the arena, but it was the woman in the arena, the man, the person in the arena. It's being out there and trying.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the critic who should be rewarded with, it's the person who's out there doing stuff. And yes, you may fail and you may not succeed, and you may do things that people 100 years later may go, he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have hunted all those animals. He shouldn't have taken that land. But he was there doing stuff compared to everyone else who wasn't doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I think this is the challenge we have. Brunel was out there doing stuff. And when he did the railways, and he started building more railway lines across all of southern Britain down to Cornwall and that area, and then started getting into shipbuilding. And I was just like, it's just remarkable what these people are doing.
And I think that's really, I love the quote that you use at the beginning of the book about the arena and the critics and people who are doing things, because I think a lot of people who are thinking about doing big things are oftentimes stopped by the fear of criticism. So I think a lot of people are afraid of writing a book because what if I get bad reviews on Amazon? Or what if I do a video for my business and I get bad comments on YouTube? Or what if I sign up for this race and I fail? And what are people going to think of me? But at least you're trying. At least you're the one who's doing something. At least you're making attempts. Whereas I think a lot of times critics are just people who aren't doing things. They're just sitting back and criticizing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's as important a lesson for modern day as it is for 100 years ago. And it's just, go out and try stuff and do stuff and see what happens. And I certainly look back on my professional career working in software. I was never brave enough. I was always too worried about what people would think and too worried about the critics in a sense, to not push myself forward.
Yeah.
And yet in writing, because the writing is my passion, people can throw darts at me all they want. Like, I have a belief in in the two books that David Herzl and I produced, and we think we're adding value to society doing this. And so in a way, that passion helps you accept the darts.
I think so too. Yeah, I once got some criticism from this in real life person who I met. We were talking about my books, and she said, "Oh, who's your publisher?" And I said, "Oh, I'm independently published." And she goes, "Oh, Vanity Publishing." And I said, "No, independent publishing." and I just thought, like, my books are all written to help people. Like, whether it's the business mindset, and I wanted to help people with business mindset, or I want to help people have their own adventures, like, I'm writing books to help people do things and achieve their goals. Like, how is that vanity publishing? Like, it was just so ridiculous to hear her use that word to describe my work. I was like, you're just being silly. Like, it didn't bother me at all. Cause like, I know what I'm doing it's not for me. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy the process, but I'm doing it with the intention to help people. So like, yeah. So I think that's really, really important, is to just know what you're doing and just be proud of that.
Yes. I think one of the lessons that comes out of the book as well is Roosevelt wasn't, he was governor of New York, and then he got tapped because he was sort of this outspoken, in a way, he was sort of a bit of a critic of some of the things, like how the U.S. wanted to do things like the Panama Canal, build a canal in Panama, and he was sort of carping from the sidelines a bit, just as a governor, and sort of became sort of nationally known, and got tapped to be vice president, and for McKinley, and Roosevelt ran on the Republican ticket, and McKinley won. So, and then 6 months later, McKinley's shot and killed. Yeah. He's assassinated, and all of a sudden, Theodore Roosevelt goes from being a governor, and like a year and a half later, he's president. It's like this.
That's a huge leap.
A huge leap, and sometimes an opportunity is just thrown at you.
Yeah.
And you've got to seize it. And I think that was one of the things that these people did. It's like Brunel, his father invented the tunneling shield and was key in the tunnel. But then when Brunel was the guy in the tunnel,
Yeah.
he had that opportunity. He knew, I'm 21-year-old or 20-year-old engineer. This is like going to be monumental, and I'm going to throw my all into it.
Yeah.
And I think, and he almost dies in the process.
Yeah.
Almost dies several times in the process. So all the stories are sort of exciting because these guys are like, maybe not Roosevelt so much as risking political life, but Brunel's risking his life, Amundsen's risking his life, and they're really going all out for what they believe in.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. Do you have any more tips from the book or from what you've learned in your research on how people can think bigger, understand they're capable of so much more than they may think, and have that broad vision to set their own audacious goals in their lives?
I think it all comes down to the one saying that came from a Roosevelt speech, which was "Dare mighty things."
Yeah.
And it all comes down to every time you're doing something, whether it's setting a goal or pursuing a goal or celebrating that you've done it, you to say, have I dared a mighty thing? Am I daring a mighty thing?
Yeah.
Is this and it's and relishing the glorious triumphs, I think, as well. They were good at celebrating the and you have to read the book because I don't want to give away some of the really great stories that are in there. But this concept of what do you do when there's a failure? How can you celebrate a failure?
Yeah.
Can you recover from a disaster? Can you dare moving forward when you know there's great risk, political risk, explorer type risk, which is life and death stuff, engineering risk, that's something you build may fall down. Now, if you have your audience for those of you who live in Britain, you might be familiar with the Maidenhead Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So, because people, the Maidenhead Bridge is the one which the railway goes over. It's this double arched bridge. It's got the widest, flattest arches of any bridge in the world. And this is the way that Brunel designed. And you look at the bridge today, it looks almost modern in design. And yet it was built like, I don't know, 150 years ago or maybe 170 years ago. And when he was first designing it, they had a contractor who was going to build it. And the contractor hadn't yet seen the plans. And he cancel the contract. I'm not doing it. This thing's going to fall down. The arches are too wide. They're too flat because you've got to take a train across the river at a very low level. They can't go up like a humpback bridge. It's got to be tall enough for boats to go under it. Yeah. And so he builds these flat arches across and he was just daring in his design of what he was building and a firm belief that he could do it and that it would stand. And it's been high speed trains go over it every 5 minutes nowadays. And it's been good, and it's been standing for 170 years or something.
Yeah, I just love the fact that we can see so many of these things today. And I think
see it, walk under it, walk around it. It's just remarkable.
Yeah. Travel on it. And I think another important thing is to feed your mind with big stories like this. I mean, I think a huge part of the reason I got into ultra marathons is because my husband and I started binge watching YouTube videos of other people running ultra marathons. So it's like, I've seen so many other people do it that's just normal for me. And I know it's not. Like for most people, a marathon is a long distance. But for me, I've seen so many videos of people running 100K and 100 miles and 200 miles that that's just what people do. So why can't I do it? So I think when you read books like yours and read stories and watch videos and consume information about people doing remarkable things, I think that also helps to open your mind to possibilities for yourself. Like at the very least, it can get you curious. Like, I wonder if this is possible for me.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's the goal of the book.
Yeah.
Is it's really to say, go off and look at things and see what you can achieve and look at what your potential could be. Follow your passion and pursue the passion and dream big,
Yeah.
think big, and
Good stuff.
dare mighty things. I think
Yeah.
that's the key message.
Yeah, absolutely. Be daring. And I know that's challenging, but the more it's like a muscle. Like the more you do it, the more you step out and do those daring things, the easier it gets.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes, I think that's true. I think the more you throw yourself into something, the more fun it gets as well.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit like it's both. It starts becoming fun to say, well, what could be that next goal?
Yeah.
What could be that next, and what would be the fun in pursuing it?
Yeah.
But to see, and this is true, whether it's mountain climbing or going to Antarctica or going to wherever, it is about, and this must be true for what you do, which is the fun is not the destination.
Yeah.
The fun is not getting to the top of the mountain. The fun's got to be in the climb.
Yeah.
And the thrill of the climb. It's because it's not, if your total focus is just the end point, you're only on the mountain summit for you're talking about Everest, you're only on the mountain summit for a few minutes. You're only at the South Pole. They're only at the South Pole for a couple of days, just mapping it and making sure that they were actually at the South Pole and not missed it. But the journey has got to be part of the fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because in a race, for example, like the finish, you cross the finish line, they put the medal around your neck and that's it. And then they're moving on to the next person. So like you can't be just focused on that and have the 100 kilometers, however long it takes you, be hell. Like one of my main goals for that race was to enjoy it because I wanted to have a nice day out in the trails. So like, absolutely. I think the focus needs to be on enjoying the journey as well as the destination. Yeah. So Brad, where can people find you online and learn more about what you do and your books?
Sure. So my website is called extremedecisions.com, but there's a dash between the words extreme and decisions. So extreme-decisions.com. And both books, When Your Life Depends on It and Audacious Goals, Remarkable Results, both of those books are available on Amazon. In Australia and New Zealand, they're available through Booktopia as well. They're through probably all online booksellers.
Great.
You probably ask your if you want to buy locally, they can probably be ordered by your local bookshop as well.
Excellent.
And if people want to reach out to me directly, they can do it through the website or just email me, brad.borkan.author@gmail.com.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Holly. It's been great fun. Always great to chat with you.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. And anyone listening to this, I highly recommend the book. I was so fascinated by all the engineering stories. I was really surprised by how fascinated I was by this because I'm not an engineer, obviously, and I don't have that kind of knowledge. But the way you tell the stories, they're so engaging and it's so exciting. And I was just highlighting so many things. It was just really, really enjoyable. So thank you for writing that book.
Oh, thanks very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
So I hope you found that episode interesting and useful. I would like to encourage you to take a moment to think about your life, your goals, what you've got planned, where you're going in life, and think about all of your goals in all aspects of life. So like career, personal life, adventures, and think about how you can, as Brad suggested, triple or quadruple them. Like, what's the next level above that goal? And the next level, and the next level. Like, what are 4 levels above that goal? And is that something that you might be interested in achieving? Even if you believe that you can't do it, or you don't believe that you can do it, I would like for you to just consider that for yourself and think about broadening your vision for your own life. It's like what Brad said. He's an author, I'm an author. And I remember when I first started writing, I had this idea for a book for years and years and years. Still haven't written that book. I keep looking at the notes for it every once in a while, but I'm like, it's not ready to be born yet. And so I work on something else. But I had this idea for this one book, and I didn't have any other ideas for other books. But still, when I bought the ISBN numbers, I bought a package of 100 numbers. Because you need one number for each type of book. So for the ebook, for the paperback. So each book needs more than one number if you're going to produce it in different formats. But I, for some reason, had this vision of I'm going to need 100 numbers. And I was just looking at my spreadsheet the other day for the ISBNs that I've assigned, and I've assigned 84 numbers. So I'm going to have to buy another package. And I was just thinking, do I buy another package of 100 or do I buy a package of 1,000? Because I've only been writing books since 2016, so for the last 5 years, and I've already almost gone through a package of 100. So to get me through the rest of my life, how many numbers will I need? I don't know. But, I only had the one book idea, but I was thinking about more than just one book. Because I knew I enjoyed writing, and I knew I would want to write more books, even though I had no idea what those books would be. So think about how you can up-level all of your goals. And I think sometimes people get really scared by massive, audacious goals. And I think that's why it's important to remember when stretching yourself and setting huge goals, there are so many steps to get there. And I think breaking each goal down into a series of steps makes it a lot easier. So if you are the kind of person that gets freaked out by envisioning really huge things for yourself, please give yourself permission to fantasize and imagine and daydream and think about what might be possible and just try to be curious. And I think this is really important, is to just have an attitude of curiosity about what might be possible for you and just open your mind. And as I always say, if you find yourself paralyzed, stuck, not able to take action, I would invite you to do some mindset work. And I've got 4 books on business mindset that can also be, the concepts can be applied to life and adventure and everything else. Or see a mindset professional. And please get in touch if you need suggestions. I have 5 great facilitators that I always recommend people to in my business books, and I'm happy to send you their details. But I would really like to just invite you to be open and curious about what you might achieve. I don't want to tell the story for the 1,000th time, but this time last year, I could only run a half an hour. And it was through feeding my mind with videos of other people doing audacious things with running, and then just actually setting the goal and putting in the time and being curious about what was possible for me, that I finally ran that ultra this year. And now I'm thinking about even bigger things. So start with where you are, because that's the only place you can start, but give yourself permission to dream big and dream crazy things. I mean, last year it was crazy for me to even think about doing a 100-mile race, and I'm already planning to do that next year. So give yourself permission to dream big, set audacious goals, dial those up 3-4 levels, and see what you're capable of. And if you're afraid of failure, do the mindset work so that you're not, so that you can take the action. Really, I wouldn't be where I am today with all the mindset work that I did. I know I've said that 1,000 times, but really it's true. So give yourself permission to dream big, set some audacious goals for yourself, and let me know what they are. I would love to hear. So please drop me a line. Let me know what you thought about this week's episode. Let me know what your audacious goals are. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. As I mentioned last week, I'm finally accepting applications for podcast guests. So if you're interested in being a guest, you can head over to hollywharton.com/pitch, that's PITCH, and fill out the form there. And if you know of anyone who would be perfect for this show, please feel free to send them the link. Thank you. And thank you so much for listening. Remember to visit hollywharton.com/422 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much, and happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.